In the frozen wilderness of Idaho, a lonely man and an abandoned dog cross paths under the harshest of circumstances. Cal, a veteran scarred by his past, discovers Hunter, an abused golden retriever, struggling to survive a brutal snowstorm. But can these two broken souls overcome their pain to find hope and trust once again? This heartwarming journey will leave you captivated. The wind howled through the forest, carrying with it sharp flakes of snow that stung against Cal's face. His scarf was pulled tight around his neck, but even the thick wool couldn't keep the chill from sinking deep into his skin. The narrow trail home was almost invisible beneath the thick layer of snow, and the fading beam of his flashlight was the only thing cutting through the darkness. He was tired. The trip to town had taken longer than expected, and the weight of the supplies strapped to his back was making his shoulders ache. But the cabin wasn't far now, just another 15 minutes at most. The thought of a warm fire and the silence of his small home urged him forward. Then he saw it. At first, it was just a flicker of movement in his peripheral vision, something that didn't belong in the static stillness of the snowy woods. He stopped, narrowing his eyes and sweeping his flashlight over the trees. The beam caught nothing but trunks and shadows. He shook his head, telling himself it was nothing, a fox or maybe a trick of the light. He started walking again. The second time he saw it, it was clearer. Something was moving, slow and hesitant, just off the trail ahead of him. He froze, his heart thudding softly in his chest. He adjusted the light, angling it toward the source of the movement. His breath caught. It was a dog, a golden retriever, though its coat was so dirty and matted that its once golden fur was now a dull, muddy yellow. The dog was thin, too thin, its ribs pressed starkly against its sides, and its legs wobbled, as if it might collapse at any moment. It moved hesitantly, each step an effort, its head lowered toward the snow. For a long moment, Cal just stood there, watching. He felt the familiar pull of pity in his chest, but it was tangled with something heavier, something he didn't want to acknowledge. He clenched his jaw and turned away, shaking his head. He had seen enough suffering in his life to know better than to get involved in things he couldn't fix. He kept walking, forcing his eyes forward, but with every step he took, the image of the dog stayed with him, those hollow eyes, the way its body shook with each unsteady movement. "Damn it!" he muttered under his breath, stopping in his tracks. The wind whipped at his back, urging him forward, but he turned around instead. The dog was still there, now standing still in the snow. It had noticed him, its head tilted slightly, its body tensed. Cal could see it trembling, whether from fear or cold he couldn't tell. As he stepped closer, the dog let out a low growl, not loud or threatening, but weak and uncertain, its ears pinned back, and it crouched slightly as if preparing to bolt. "It's okay," Cal said softly, crouching down and lowering his flashlight so the light wasn't directly in the dog's face. He kept his voice calm, gentle, though he wasn't sure why he was bothering. "I'm not going to hurt you." The dog didn't move, its dark eyes fixed on him. There was a wariness there that Cal recognized, a kind of resigned mistrust, as if it had long ago given up on the idea that the world could be kind. Cal stayed where he was, crouched in the snow, for a long moment. The cold bit at his fingers, and he could feel the dampness seeping through the knees of his jeans. He wasn't sure what he was waiting for. The dog wasn't going to come to him, that much was clear. With a sigh, he shifted his pack off his shoulders and began rummaging through it. He didn't have much to offer. He hadn't exactly prepared for a rescue mission, but he found the emergency blanket he always carried and a protein bar tucked into a side pocket. Carefully, he unfolded the blanket and spread it out on the snow a few feet away from the dog. Then he unwrapped the protein bar and placed it on top. "Here," he said, standing and stepping back slowly. "It's not much, but it's better than nothing." The dog didn't move at first. It stayed frozen in place, its eyes darting between him and the makeshift offering. Cal waited, his breath puffing out in white clouds around him. The minutes stretched on, and he began to wonder if he'd made a mistake. Then, slowly, the dog took a step forward. Its movements were cautious, each step deliberate, as if it expected the ground to give way beneath its feet. When it reached the blanket, it sniffed the protein bar tentatively before snatching it up and retreating a few steps to eat it. Cal watched, a strange mix of relief and sadness washing over him. He had done what he could, but it didn't feel like enough. The dog needed more than a blanket and a protein bar. It needed a safe place to rest, real food, warmth. But Cal couldn't offer it any of those things. He couldn't even offer himself those things most days. The wind picked up again and he shivered. He knew he couldn't stay out here much longer. He adjusted his pack on his shoulders and took one last look at the dog. Its eyes met his, and for a brief moment something passed between them, an unspoken understanding, a shared sense of being lost. "I'm sorry," Cal said quietly, though he wasn't sure who he was apologizing to. Then he turned and began walking toward the cabin. The trail seemed darker now, the trees closer, the wind louder. By the time he reached the cabin, his fingers were numb and his face stung from the cold. He dropped his pack by the door and lit the fire, watching as the flames flickered to life. But even as the cabin warmed, he couldn't shake the chill that had settled deep in his chest. That night, as he lay in bed, he couldn't stop thinking about the dog, the way it had stood there in the snow, shaking but refusing to fall, the way its eyes had seemed to hold the weight of the world. He told himself he'd done enough, that it wasn't his responsibility, that there was nothing more he could do. But as he drifted into a restless sleep, the image of those eyes stayed with him, haunting the edges of his dreams. The morning after his encounter with the dog, Cal couldn't shake the memory of its hollow, distrustful eyes. Even as he went about his routine, chopping wood, checking the traps he'd set for rabbits, and restocking the firewood pile, the image lingered in his mind. He tried to push it aside, telling himself the dog would either move on or survive on its own. But as the hours passed, the gnawing guilt became unbearable. By mid-afternoon, Cal found himself packing a small bag. He stuffed a few scraps of food inside, a couple of sausages left over from his dinner, a piece of bread he didn't care for, and a thermos of water. Slinging the bag over his shoulder, he set out toward the spot where he'd last seen the dog. The trail was quiet, the snow crunching softly underfoot. When he reached the bend by the frozen stream, his heart sank. The blanket he'd left was there, half buried in the snow, but the dog was gone. He let out a slow breath, half relieved and half disappointed. But as he turned to leave, a faint rustling caught his attention. He froze, scanning the underbrush. There, beneath a thicket of pine trees, was the dog. Its golden coat was barely visible against the dappled shadows of the branches, but its dark eyes watched him warily. "Still here, huh?" Cal murmured, crouching down. He placed the bag on the ground and carefully unpacked the food, laying it a few feet away from where he stood. "I brought something for you." The dog didn't move. It stayed curled tightly in the small hollow it had made for itself, its body tense and ready to flee. Cal didn't press it. Instead, he sat down on a nearby log, his movements slow and deliberate, and kept his distance. For a long time, neither of them moved. The dog's eyes stayed locked on him, unblinking, while Cal sat silently, his breath visible in the cold air. The sun dipped lower in the sky, and he began to wonder if his efforts were pointless. But then, slowly, the dog shifted. Its nose twitched, and its head lifted slightly as it sniffed the air. "You smell it, don't you?" Cal said softly. He leaned back, making himself appear smaller. "Go on. It's for you." The dog crept forward on trembling legs, every movement cautious and deliberate. It stopped several times, its body stiff with mistrust, before finally reaching the food. It sniffed the offerings, then snatched the sausage and retreated quickly to its hollow. Cal smiled faintly, though he didn't move or speak again. He stayed until the sun dipped below the horizon, watching as the dog slowly finished the meal. When the cold became unbearable, he rose to leave, careful not to make any sudden movements. The dog watched him go, its body still tense but no longer trembling. Over the next week, Cal returned to the spot every day, bringing food and sitting quietly nearby. The routine became something of a ritual. He never approached the dog, letting it decide the pace. Each day, the distance between them grew smaller. The dog began to eat without retreating, its mistrust fading ever so slightly. By the fourth day, Cal felt brave enough to speak. "You're a tough one, aren't you?" he said, his voice low and even. "Surviving out here all on your own. You remind me of someone." The dog didn't respond, of course, but its ears twitched slightly at the sound of his voice. Cal chuckled softly. "I think I'll call you Hunter," he continued. "You're cautious, but you're still fighting. That takes guts." The name felt right. Hunter suited the dog's resilience, its cautious strength. Over the next few days, Cal began using the name more frequently, and though the dog didn't seem to acknowledge it, he liked the sound of it. On the seventh day, as Cal sat on the log and watched Hunter eat, something remarkable happened. The dog, having finished the last of its meal, didn't retreat immediately. Instead, it sat down on the blanket Cal had left and stared at him. The look in its eyes was different, less hollow, less afraid. It wasn't trust, not yet, but it was something close. For the first time in what felt like years, Cal felt a flicker of warmth in his chest. Hunter wasn't just surviving anymore, he was choosing to stay, and somehow that small act of trust felt like a victory. Hunter's trust was fragile, like ice just beginning to thaw. Each day, Cal took small steps to close the distance between them. He moved slowly, careful not to make any sudden movements that might undo the progress they had made. Over time, Hunter allowed him to come closer, close enough that Cal could finally see the dog in detail. It was worse than he'd imagined. Beneath the tangled and matted fur, Hunter's body bore the evidence of a hard life. Faint scars crisscrossed his legs and sides, and patches of fur were missing where the skin had never fully healed. One particular scar stood out, a circular mark behind his right ear, as though something sharp had pressed into him for far too long. His gait was uneven, and the way his body tensed when Cal raised his hand to adjust his coat suggested that Hunter's past had been marked by more than physical wounds. Cal crouched nearby, his voice steady and soft. "You've been through it, haven't you, Hunter?" he murmured. The dog didn't flinch, but kept its eyes on him, its body still wary. "Whoever did this to you, they didn't deserve you." The words hung in the cold air, and Cal felt a strange twist in his chest. He wasn't just talking to Hunter anymore, he was talking to himself. That evening back at the cabin, Cal sat by the fire, staring into the flames as memories crept in unbidden. He didn't try to stop them this time. He saw the faces of the men he had served with, their laughter echoing faintly in his mind before being drowned out by the roar of explosions. He saw their bodies, lifeless and still, as the dust settled. He saw himself, standing in the aftermath, wondering why he had been spared. The scars Hunter bore were different from Cal's own, but the pain they carried felt eerily similar. Just as Hunter's body had been marked by cruelty, Cal's soul had been etched with the weight of loss, guilt, and regret. Both of them had been shaped by their pasts, and neither of them had fully healed. The next morning, Cal returned to the clearing with more food and a quiet determination to bridge the gap between them. Hunter was waiting, his golden fur catching the pale light of the rising sun. This time, Cal didn't sit as far back. He crouched closer, placing the food gently on the ground and staying still as Hunter approached. As the dog ate, Cal studied him carefully. Hunter's movements were slow and deliberate, as though every step required careful calculation. His eyes darted around constantly, always watching for threats. Even in the relative safety of their small truce, he couldn't fully relax. When Hunter finished eating, he glanced at Cal briefly before retreating a few steps. Cal remained crouched, his hands resting on his knees. "You don't have to run," he said softly. "Not every hand is going to hurt you." Hunter's ears twitched at the sound of his voice, but he didn't move closer. Still, the fact that he stayed within sight was progress. Cal let out a slow breath, feeling the faintest flicker of hope. "We're not so different, you and me," he continued. "We've both got our scars." Over the next few days, Cal continued to earn Hunter's trust, inching closer with each visit. One afternoon, as he extended his hand cautiously, Hunter didn't pull away. Instead, the dog sniffed his fingers tentatively before stepping back. It was a small gesture, but it felt monumental. For Cal, the process was as much about healing himself as it was about helping Hunter. Each scar he saw on the dog's body reminded him of the invisible wounds he carried. The two of them were broken in different ways, but in each other they seemed to find a sense of understanding. Cal wasn't sure what that meant yet, but he knew it mattered. The storm began in the late afternoon, heralded by dark clouds rolling over the horizon and a sudden bone-chilling wind. By the time night fell, the snow was coming down in thick, relentless sheets, the world outside Cal's cabin swallowed by a blizzard's fury. The wind howled like a wild beast, rattling the windows and piling snow against the wooden walls. Cal sat by the fire, the glow of the flames casting flickering shadows across the room. He tried to focus on the book in his hands, but his mind wandered. He hadn't seen Hunter since the morning, and the thought of the dog braving the storm alone left a knot of unease in his chest. Hunter had survived worse, Cal reminded himself, but still he couldn't shake the worry. A sudden scratching at the door broke through the howl of the wind. Cal froze, his heart skipping a beat. It came again, soft but desperate. Rising quickly, he crossed the room and opened the door just enough to peer outside. Hunter was there, huddled against the snow-covered steps, his body trembling violently. His fur was coated with ice, and his breath came in shallow puffs of mist. He looked up at Cal, his dark eyes pleading in a way that struck straight to the core of the man's guarded heart. For a moment, Cal hesitated. Letting the dog inside felt like crossing a line, one that would blur the careful boundaries he had drawn to keep others at bay. But as he watched Hunter shiver, his instincts overrode his doubts. "All right," he muttered, opening the door wide. "Come on." Hunter hesitated, his body language unsure. Cal stepped back, keeping his movements slow and unthreatening. "It's okay," he said softly. "You'll freeze out there." At last, Hunter stepped inside, his legs unsteady as he crossed the threshold. Cal shut the door quickly, shutting out the blizzard's roar. For a moment, the two of them stood there in the dim light of the cabin, the silence between them broken only by the crackle of the fire. Hunter remained close to the door, his posture tense, as if unsure of his welcome. Cal retrieved a blanket from the couch and laid it by the fire, then stepped aside. "Here," he said, gesturing toward the warm spot. "It's better than freezing to death." Hunter sniffed the blanket cautiously before lying down, his body still trembling. Cal sat back in his chair, watching as the dog gradually began to relax. The firelight danced across Hunter's golden coat, now damp but beginning to dry. That night, as the storm raged outside, Cal lay in bed, his mind restless. The cabin felt smaller with another presence inside, but it wasn't unwelcome. He could hear Hunter's soft breathing from the other room, a reminder that he wasn't entirely alone. Sleep came fitfully, bringing with it the nightmares that had plagued him for years. In his dreams, he was back on the battlefield. Gunfire erupted around him, and the cries of his comrades pierced the air. The acrid smell of smoke and the metallic tang of blood filled his senses. He saw their faces, men he couldn't save, and the weight of guilt pressed down on him like a crushing tide. Cal woke with a start, his chest heaving and his body drenched in sweat. He sat up abruptly, the echoes of his dreams still ringing in his ears. A sharp gasp escaped him, and he buried his face in his hands, trying to steady his breathing. A soft whine broke through the haze of his panic. He looked up to see Hunter standing in the doorway, his head tilted and his eyes filled with quiet concern. The dog moved toward him cautiously, his steps slow and deliberate, as if sensing Cal's fragility. Before Cal could react, Hunter placed his head gently on the man's knee. The weight of it was grounding, a small but steady presence in the chaos of Cal's mind. Cal froze, his hand hovering over the dog's head before finally resting there. He stroked the coarse fur, his touch hesitant at first, but growing surer with each pass. For the first time in years, the panic began to subside. The room grew quiet, save for the steady sound of Hunter's breathing and the crackle of the dying fire in the other room. Cal let out a shaky breath, his fingers still tangled in Hunter's fur. "Thanks," he murmured, his voice barely audible. He wasn't sure if he was thanking Hunter for coming inside, for staying, or simply for existing. Perhaps it was all of those things. Hunter didn't move. He stayed there, his head resting on Cal's knee, offering a kind of comfort that words couldn't provide. And for the first time in a long time, Cal didn't feel entirely alone. The storm had passed, leaving the world coated in a fresh blanket of snow that glistened under the weak winter sun. The air was still sharp, but there was a calmness to the forest now, a sense of renewal. Inside the cabin, Cal was lacing up his boots, glancing occasionally at Hunter, who lay near the fire, his golden coat now dry and soft. "Well," Cal said, more to himself than the dog, "if we're going to be stuck with each other, we might as well make the most of it." Hunter's ears twitched at the sound of Cal's voice, but didn't lift his head. Cal grabbed his coat and a sturdy leash he'd dug out of an old supply box. He wasn't sure if Hunter had ever been on a leash before, but it seemed worth a try. "Come on, boy," Cal called, patting his thigh. Hunter looked up, but didn't move. With a sigh, Cal approached slowly, holding the leash out for Hunter to sniff. "It's not going to hurt you, I promise." Hunter eyed the leash with suspicion but didn't retreat. After a few moments, Cal managed to clip it onto the makeshift collar he'd fashioned from a strip of cloth. It was a small victory, but it felt monumental. Outside, the air was brisk, and the snow crunched under their feet. Cal led Hunter down the trail, moving at a slow, steady pace. At first, Hunter lagged behind, his body stiff and hesitant. But as they walked, his steps grew more confident, and he began to explore his surroundings with cautious curiosity. "See? Not so bad, huh?" Cal said, glancing back at the dog. Hunter's tail gave a small wag, a barely perceptible motion, but enough to make Cal smile. The daily walks became a routine, a quiet ritual that neither of them seemed to mind. Cal took the opportunity to teach Hunter simple commands: sit, stay, come. The progress was slow, with more failures than successes, but Cal didn't mind. Each small step felt like a shared victory, a testament to the fragile trust they were building. One morning, as they walked through the forest, Cal decided to test the limits of that trust. He stopped and knelt down, meeting Hunter's gaze. "All right, let's try something," he said, unhooking the leash. He held up his hand, signaling Hunter to stay. "Don't make me regret this." Hunter stood still, his body tense as if unsure what to do. Cal took a few steps back, keeping his hand raised. "Stay," he repeated firmly. For a moment, Hunter stayed rooted to the spot, his dark eyes fixed on Cal. Then, cautiously, he took a step forward. Cal sighed, a mix of frustration and amusement bubbling in his chest. "No, not yet. Stay means—" Before he could finish, Hunter closed the gap between them, stopping just in front of Cal and wagging his tail. A full wag this time, not the hesitant twitch Cal had seen before. Cal chuckled despite himself. "All right, close enough. We'll get there." Back at the cabin, Cal reflected on their progress. It wasn't much, not by anyone else's standards, but it felt significant to him. Hunter's small victories mirrored his own struggles to reconnect with the world around him. Each time Hunter learned something new or grew a little braver, Cal felt a flicker of pride, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years. One afternoon, as they returned from a walk, Cal spotted a pair of deer grazing near the edge of the clearing. He stopped, gesturing for Hunter to stay. This time, the dog obeyed, sitting quietly at Cal's side as they watched the deer. The moment felt surreal, almost peaceful. "You're getting it," Cal said, reaching down to scratch behind Hunter's ear. The dog leaned into his touch, and for a brief moment, Cal felt the weight of his past lift just a little. The process wasn't without its setbacks. There were days when Hunter refused to leave the cabin or cowered at sudden noises, and there were times when Cal's patience wore thin. But he reminded himself that healing took time, for both of them. The failures didn't erase the progress they'd made. They were just part of the journey. Every evening, as the fire crackled and the snow fell softly outside, Cal would sit with Hunter by his side, reflecting on the day. Each small step forward, each shared moment, brought them closer to something neither of them had dared to hope for, a sense of belonging. The fire crackled softly in the cabin as Cal leaned back in his chair, a steaming cup of coffee in his hands. Outside, the night was calm, the kind of stillness that only the deep woods could offer. Hunter lay stretched out near the hearth, his breathing slow and steady. For the first time in years, Cal felt a semblance of peace. Then it came, a faint, distant sound cutting through the silence. At first, Cal thought it was the wind playing tricks on him, but when it came again, louder and more desperate, he realized it was a cry for help. Hunter was on his feet in an instant, his ears perked and his body tense. He let out a low bark, his eyes fixed on the door as if urging Cal to move. Cal frowned, his muscles tensing. "It's probably nothing," he muttered, more to himself than the dog. But deep down he knew that wasn't true. The cry came again, carrying with it an urgency that was impossible to ignore. Cal sighed, setting his coffee down and grabbing his coat. "All right, let's see what's going on," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. He wasn't the type to involve himself in other people's problems anymore. That part of him had been buried a long time ago. Hunter rushed ahead as soon as the door opened, his paws kicking up snow as he bolted into the night. Cal followed, his flashlight cutting a narrow path through the darkness. The cries grew louder as they approached, interspersed with the howling wind. Finally, the beam of Cal's flashlight landed on the source of the commotion, a small SUV, its front half buried in a snowbank. The driver's door was open, and a woman stood next to it, waving frantically. Her face was pale, her breath visible in the cold air. "Help!" she called out, her voice trembling. "Please, my son! He's in the car! We're stuck!" For a moment, Cal hesitated. Years of isolation had made him wary of others, and the idea of getting involved felt foreign, even risky. But before he could retreat into his doubts, Hunter barked sharply and darted toward the SUV. The urgency in the dog's movements snapped Cal out of his hesitation. All right, he muttered, following Hunter to the car. The woman's eyes filled with relief as he approached. "Thank you," she said, her voice cracking. "The snow, it came so fast. We couldn't see the road and now we're stuck. My son, he's cold, and I don't know how much longer we can stay warm." Cal nodded briskly, assessing the situation. The snow was packed tightly around the car, and the wheels were completely buried. He glanced inside and saw a small boy huddled in the back seat, wrapped in a thin blanket. His cheeks were flushed from the cold, and he clung to a stuffed animal for warmth. "Hunter," "Stay with the boy," Cal ordered, his voice steady. The dog immediately jumped into the car and curled up next to the child, his body providing much-needed warmth. The boy's eyes widened in surprise, but he didn't resist. Instead, he buried his face in Hunter's fur, his shivering beginning to subside. Cal turned to the woman. "We'll need to dig the car out. Do you have a shovel?" She shook her head, tears brimming in her eyes. I didn't think—" "It's fine," Cal said, cutting her off. He retrieved the small emergency shovel he always carried in his pack and began working. The snow was dense and unyielding, and every shovelful felt heavier than the last. The woman tried to help, but her hands were trembling too much to be of much use. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours as Cal dug, the cold seeping into his bones. Hunter stayed with the boy the entire time, his presence a source of comfort and warmth. Finally, with one last heave, the wheels were free. "All right," Cal said, breathing hard. "Try to reverse slowly. Don't floor it or you'll get stuck again." The woman nodded, sliding into the driver's seat. With a gentle push from Cal at the back, the SUV lurched free from the snowbank. The woman stopped the car and got out, her face a mixture of gratitude and exhaustion. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You saved us. I don't know what would have happened if—" "Don't worry about it," Cal said, brushing snow off his coat. He opened the back door to retrieve Hunter, but the dog hesitated, his eyes fixed on the boy. The child reached out, wrapping his small arms around Hunter's neck in a wordless gesture of gratitude. For a moment, Cal felt his throat tighten. "He's a good dog," the woman said softly, watching the interaction. Cal nodded. "Yeah, he is." By the time they returned to the cabin, the blizzard had picked up again. Cal sat by the fire, staring into the flames as Hunter curled up beside him. For years, Cal had convinced himself that he couldn't make a difference, that he was better off keeping the world at arm's length. But tonight, something had shifted. Helping that family had reminded him of something he thought he'd lost, a sense of purpose. He reached down, his hand resting gently on Hunter's head. "You were the brave one tonight," he said quietly. Hunter tilted his head, his dark eyes meeting Cal's. In that moment, Cal felt something he hadn't felt in years: hope. Winter's grip on the forest began to loosen. The days grew longer, and the snow, once thick and unyielding, started to melt into rivulets that ran down the slopes. The bitter chill in the air softened, replaced by the first whispers of spring. For Cal, it felt as though the world was waking up, pulling itself out of the frozen stillness where he and Hunter had first met. Hunter, too, had transformed. The frail, distrustful dog that had once trembled in the snow was now almost unrecognizable. His coat, now thick and golden, gleamed in the sunlight, and his eyes, once hollow and wary, sparkled with energy and trust. Each morning, as Cal opened the cabin door, Hunter bounded out with a vigor that seemed to defy his age, barking joyfully at the returning birds or playfully chasing after the melting snowdrifts. Cal watched these small moments with a quiet sense of pride. Hunter's transformation wasn't just physical, it was a testament to resilience, to the power of trust and care, and in many ways it mirrored Cal's own journey. The isolation that had once defined his life now felt distant, like the remnants of winter snow disappearing into the earth. One evening, as the last light of day stretched across the horizon, Cal sat on the porch with Hunter at his feet. A letter rested in his hands, the edges worn from his fingers, running over it repeatedly. It was from a local group that organized support meetings for veterans. Cal had ignored their invitations before, but something about this time felt different. "You think it's time?" he asked, glancing down at Hunter. The dog tilted his head, his eyes warm and steady. Cal smiled faintly. "Yeah, me too." The following week, Cal attended his first meeting. The room was modest, filled with men and women whose faces bore the same quiet weight that Cal saw in his own reflection. He was nervous at first, unsure of what to say or whether he even belonged there. But as the hours passed, he listened to their stories, tales of loss, struggle, and the slow path to healing, and felt something shift within him. When it was his turn to speak, Cal hesitated. His voice was rough, unpracticed, but the words came anyway. He spoke of the battlefield, of the friends he had lost, and of the years he had spent running from those memories. Then he spoke of Hunter, the dog who had come into his life when he least expected it, and had helped him find his way back. "I thought I was saving him," Cal said, his voice quiet but steady. "But the truth is, he saved me." The room was silent for a moment before a ripple of nods and murmurs spread through the group. For the first time in years, Cal didn't feel alone. Encouraged by the meeting, Cal decided to take another step. He reached out to a nearby animal rescue, offering to volunteer. The idea of helping other animals like Hunter felt natural, almost necessary, as though it was the next step in his journey. Hunter was a natural at the rescue. The other dogs seemed to gravitate toward him, sensing his calm and steady presence. Cal often found himself watching as Hunter lay among the younger dogs, patiently allowing them to climb over him, or nip playfully at his ears. One day, a woman at the rescue asked about Hunter's story. Cal hesitated at first, unsure of how much to share, but as he began to speak, the words came easily. He told her about the night he found Hunter in the snow, about the scars they had both carried, and about the small, steady steps that had brought them to where they were now. The woman listened intently, her eyes soft with understanding. "You should share that story with more people," she said. "It could help others." Cal thought about her words long after she left. He wasn't sure if he was ready to share his story with the world, but he knew one thing for certain. Hunter's journey, and his own, wasn't just about survival. It was about connection, about finding hope in the unlikeliest places, and about the quiet, transformative power of kindness. As the days grew warmer, Cal and Hunter continued their walks through the forest. The landscape, once stark and silent, was now alive with the sounds of birdsong and the rustle of new leaves. Hunter seemed to revel in the change, his steps lighter and his tail wagging constantly. One afternoon, as they reached the edge of a hill overlooking the valley, Cal paused. The view was breathtaking. The world spread out before them in shades of green and gold. He rested a hand on Hunter's head, his fingers brushing the soft fur. "You did good, buddy," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Hunter leaned into him, his warm presence grounding Cal in the moment. For the first time in years, Cal felt truly at peace. He didn't know what the future held, but for now, that was enough. Cal's journey with Hunter teaches us a profound truth. Healing often comes from unexpected places. Through loyalty, love, and resilience, we are reminded that God's grace is always present, even in the darkest moments. Just as Hunter brought light into Cal's life, God works through acts of kindness, big and small, to bring hope and renewal to our hearts. No matter what you're facing, remember that God's love can mend the deepest wounds and guide us toward peace and purpose. Let this story inspire you to be a vessel of His compassion, extending kindness to others and finding strength in connection. If this story moved you, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Share a comment below about a time when kindness or faith made a difference in your life. And don't forget to share this story with others. It might just be the reminder they need to believe in love, hope, and second chances. Together, let's spread God's light and grace to the world. May He bless you abundantly.